entitled Teaching About Fort Chicago, Remembering Jimmy Lee Cromartie as an Eyewitness to History. All right? In my presentation, I have four brief objectives I'm going to cover in very, very brief fashion. One objective is to discuss the social background of Jimmy Lee Cromartie. A second objective is to discuss what Jimmy Lee Cromartie told me about Fort Chicago. A third objective is to discuss my teaching about Fort Chicago at Contra Costa College. And then lastly, I will talk about my thoughts on Steve's new book. Now, last year I published a book. The book is titled Morgan Fraser Family Clan, Chronicles of a Black Family with a Geechee and Gullah Heritage, and essays, interviews, research reports, documents, and photographs. And this is the cover of the book. The book is available through Amazon.com. One of the people I talk about in that book, his name is Jimmy Lee Cromartie. Jimmy Lee Cromartie. Now moving on to Jimmy Lee Cromartie and his social background. He was a black man of Gullah heritage. He was a black man with Gullah heritage. He was born on July 17, 1922 in Panama City, Florida. He died on December 3rd, 1983 in Jessup, Georgia. Today would have been his 92nd birthday. Today would have been his 92nd birthday. Today is the birthday of Jimmy Lee Cromartie. He served in the U.S. Army from 1942 to 1946 as a military police. He was stationed in the Bay Area when Fort Chicago blew up. Jimmy Lee Cromartie was my father. And this is a picture of my father, Jimmy Lee Cromartie. Now moving on. Institutional discrimination faced by Jimmy Lee Cromartie. From 1946 to 1966, he tried to get a job in Jessup, Georgia as a police officer. He worked in Turpentine as a laborer until he was finally successful in 1966. As a result of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, he became the first black police officer in Jessup, Georgia. And he served as a police officer there from 1966 to his death in 1983 from lung cancer. It took my father 20 years to get a job as a police officer. When he finally got into the police force, the people who kept him out were returned. They were returned. As a result, my family lost a lot of wealth that he could not transfer from one generation to the next because he was a black man. The only reason why he could not become a police officer in Jessup, Georgia was the fact that he was a black man. The only reason why. And what changed that was the 1964 Civil Rights Act. That's what changed it. It made it illegal for anybody to discriminate against black people. And finally, black people who were fully qualified to get jobs were able to get some of those jobs. And he is one of those people that benefited from the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Now moving on. This slide shows the headstone of the grave of my father in Scriven, Georgia, where he's buried in the Carter Cemetery. It reads, Jimmy Lee Cromartie, PFC, U.S. Army, World War II, July 17, 1922, December 3rd, 1983. So again, today is his birthday. Not far from him, in this same cemetery, are some other relatives. We have one relative by the name of Alex Morgan. Alex Morgan, who was born, Alex Morgan was born in 1825, and he died in 1938. He lived 113 years. Also not far from my father, where my father was buried, is his mother and his father. His father was born in 1883 and died in 1962. His mother was born in 1886 and died in 1980. I am so lucky to have known most of those people I just mentioned. Now moving on. Here's the home of my grandmother, Julia Wright Palmerty in Scriven, Georgia, where my father told me about Port Chicago. We sat on that porch on this side, and he told me the story of Port Chicago in 1976. At the time, he was 50 years old, and I was 22. He was 50, and I was 22. I was in the Navy at that time. I joined the military when I was 17. He joined when he was 20. I joined when I was 17. And he asked me, he said, where are you stationed at now? I said, I'm stationed at Mare Island. And he said, son, I was stationed out there too, in that area. And then he proceeded to tell me the story of Port Chicago. Now, from that porch were these two chairs that are still there. They were there in 1976, and they're still there on that porch. And we sat in those chairs, and he told me the story of Port Chicago and what happened. Now, moving on to what he told me about Port Chicago. He told me that the disaster took place on his birthday, his 22nd birthday. He was on Liberty on 7th Street in Oakland having a good time partying. He said the MPs came around and told all military personnel to go back to their duty stations. The next morning, he ended up in Port Chicago where he saw major destruction, including pieces of bodies. He said there were pieces of bodies all around. Heads, arms, legs, feet, and the like. He also said that it was an injustice for the military to court-martial those black sailors. Again, he said it was an injustice for the military to court-martial those black sailors. Now, that was not the first time I heard of Port Chicago. The first time I heard of Port Chicago was in 1972 when I was 17 years old and I was in the military. And I was going through boot camp at the U.S. Navy. And we had a little segment when we were talking about the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And then they pointed out that one could be court-martialed. And then they happened to mention that 50 who got court-martialed before at a place called Port Chicago. And that's the first time I heard of Port Chicago. Again, 1972 when I was 17 years old. The next time I heard about it was from my own father in 1976 when I was 22. Now moving on. I want to share with you 3 photographs that my father saw. The scene that he saw once he got to Port Chicago that morning. This is the pier. This is the kind of destruction that he saw. Bodies were being brought. Pieces of bodies were there. Here's another scene of the pier. Cars were destroyed. The whole pier was left. And of course the ships were gone. Here's another scene that he saw. The barracks. The barracks. Here are sailors looking out of the barracks, looking out. And of course, those photographs can be seen in Dr. Allen's book. Now moving on. I want to talk about teaching Port Chicago at Country Cross College. I teach about Port Chicago by using special lesson plans and undergraduate sociology courses. I use a documentary titled Port Chicago Mutiny, a National Tragedy from KRON TV. It was produced in 1990, a documentary. I also used a feature film that was directed by Kevin Hooks, titled Unity. It came out in 1999. It stars Michael Ajayi White, Wayne Gordon, and David Ramsey. It's a very, very good film. A third reference I use is Dr. Allen's book, The Port Chicago Mutiny. In 2006, I sponsored a national conference called the Working Class Academics Conference. And people of working class backgrounds came from all over the country and some parts of the world. And we had a conference about working class people who had made it into academia, who were teaching across the country. I also invited Dr. Allen to give the keynote address, which he agreed to do. So on July 29, 2006, Dr. Allen spoke to about 200 students at Contra Costa College. His address was entitled, "The Poor Chicago Mutiny as a Working Class Strike." So Dr. Allen made the case that it wasn't a mutiny, it was actually a strike. So I think, Steve, I heard you said you didn't like it. Somebody said they didn't like the word mutiny. Somebody said that, but Dr. Allen said it should be seen as a strike. Now moving on. Now I want to talk about Steve's new book on Poor Chicago. In my opinion, Steve has written a powerful book titled The Poor Chicago 50, which deserves to be widely read. Steve gives credit to those who wrote about Poor Chicago before him, including Dr. Allen. Now, to my surprise, the reviews in the New York Times, Publishers Weekly, and Teen Reads ignored the shoulders that Steve stood on when he wrote the book. For example, in those reviews, they never mentioned Dr. Allen. They never mentioned what came before Steve. And in my view, that's an oversight. Lastly, I urge people to read Steve's book as well as Dr. Allen's book to get the full picture of the Poor Chicago